Welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hey, I'm Amanda.
Hello there. We are your source for messy, imperfect homeschool advice and community. Now, if this is your first episode, you might be thinking, how on earth is this messy? Now, if you listen through this episode, you might be thinking, that was messy. It's packed with data and really rock solid information about phonics and reading instruction. And that is true. Amanda is an absolute legend in this topic, and this is going to be a solid hour of me enjoying watching her nerd out on a topic that she loves. And her passion will be so contagious that I'll be invested right along with you and listening and being like, hooray, phonics. Yeah.
Oh boy, talk about pressure. Yikes. And I will say, I am pretty pumped for this, but also Megan is right. We still contend that the messy and imperfect label fits because it's more about us than the validity of the advice that we provide. The advice is good. It's solid. We love data. And we're also never going to show up here and be all, here's what we do, so you should do exactly that same thing, because we don't even do the same things. Like, that would be weird. But we are going to go back decades into research, and we're going to read countless studies and listen to all kinds of things and watch things to make sure that we're super well informed. Because, yes, we are nerds, and we do love that stuff. But also, two, it makes it so you don't have to. We can digest it here for you because we actually enjoy doing that. And we make the time for it because it's part of the podcast. And then we offer tips on how and when to implement some of the things that we're discussing, but like in a real life kind of way.
Well, real life being the key there. That's just it. Because when we watch influencers talking about homeschooling, it always reminds me of that Rachel Ray show back in the day. She had that 30-minute meals on TV, and my mom and I would watch it. And I totally remember my mom just being like, yeah, girlfriend, it's 30 minutes when somebody washed and cut everything ahead of time for you, and you're not pulling a dirty frying pan out of the dishwasher going, oh shit, I forgot to run this earlier. And then at the end, somebody swoops in and cleans up everything after you when you're done. It's like, oh yeah, that was easy. 30 minutes. Boom. Done. Look at my fancy meal. And that's how homeschool influencers tend to be so often. They're like, look at me doing this thing. It's so easy. Except it isn't. And you're making it look that way for clicks and views. So if you're a parent or caregiver who's juggling 700 things and you never seem to have enough time and you're perpetually tired and you write a to-do list with amazing intentions, but you never manage to actually clear the to-do list and you're placing an Instacart order an hour after you got home from the store because you're like, oh, I forgot 3 things and 2 of them are for dinner tonight. That's us. Okay. Right. That's who we are. Our lives are messy and imperfect. And yes, we are always tired and need another set of hands and maybe just like 6 more hours in the day. So our homeschool advice comes from that point of view, not shiny influencer land.
And I just have to say, if you don't live a block away from a place that has a huge portion of carne asada nachos for $16 that you can order on the day that you just can't make dinner happen, I feel sorry for you because that is 100% my go-to. Like, and it's going to be carne asada nachos today for dinner. Everyone dig in. Giant platter on the coffee table, and that's what we got.
Yeah, because sometimes that just needs to happen. Yeah.
For real. Okay, the other thing is, it feels more reasonable for you as an equally overwhelmed human to take the parts that work for you that we're talking about and then just leave the stuff that just feels like it's too much, or you're like, yeah, that is not going to work for my kids, or I would rather go get a root canal than try to implement that in my own home. Thank you very much. And also, give yourself some grace when the plan just goes totally off the rails. Because, that happens to us too. That is what we want to share. It's not just you. And that's so totally okay. We tweak and try again, honestly, as many times as necessary, over and over and over. Probably, I was going to say until our kids leave home, but honestly, probably even after they leave home. That's just life.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. The other thing that makes us a bit unique, super unique, is the fact that we are homeschoolers who are secular and progressive as all get out. We want our girls, well, Amanda doesn't have a girl, but I want my girl, and Amanda wants this for other girls, to have an equal education as boys. Believe it or not, they can be something other than a midwife. There's nothing wrong with being a midwife, but it's not the only profession available to girls in our homeschool circles.
Yeah.
We teach fact-based science and history that's hard to talk about. We don't believe that higher education is a liberal brainwashing machine. So yes, we do exist, and there are way more of us than you might think, which is good news.
True story. And to make sure that there is no confusion, we loudly affirm abortion is necessary health care. Black Lives Matter. Fuck ICE. Charge the pedophiles. Yes, even if that means Bill Clinton. And for the love of everything, stop freaking bombing innocent children in other countries. They should not be a target. Yep. If all of that sounds like a rally cry to you that you can get behind and not a lecture from crazed woke leftists, then you're probably in the right spot. And if it sounds terrible, there's a off button somewhere. Feel free to click it. Goodbye.
Yeah, and there's about 700 homeschool podcasts that are right up your alley. Right?
Right.
Why we created this one, because we didn't want to listen to any of those. So enjoy. Yeah,
Have
Yeah.
fun.
exactly.
Won't see you later.
And truly, one of the really meaningful ways that impacts our community is that we build resources that align with those values. So, for example, if you're new to homeschooling and you're trying to find history curriculum and you're looking at all of the options that are out there and you're thinking, how do I know which one of these is going to, in an age and developmentally appropriate way, explain the reality of the transatlantic slave trade versus which one is going to refer to that horrific system as quote unquote Black migration. And yes, that really does exist in history textbooks. We can help you so that you don't end up with the Black migration textbook. We have built a resource that will help you identify even subtle red flags in curriculum and will also help you understand why neutral curriculum isn't as innocuous as the name might lead you to believe.
Oh, yeah, right. Neutral sounds like a good thing. Like, well, who wouldn't want a
Yeah.
neutral, well-balanced curriculum until you realize it's actually code for we don't discuss evolution or the Big Bang Theory because it'll upset some conservative Christian homeschoolers. I can't. So, all right. So anyway, we've created loads of resources, unit studies, American history units, how to homeschool from kinder through high school, graduation, book. We've got online courses and just so much more. In fact, we are purposely creating all of the resources we wish we'd had when we were first starting out. So you can check the show notes. You can go to our website. It's really simple. It's homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com. Because listen, if you're looking for guidance, no matter what stage you're in, we've got you. We've worked really hard to make sure that we have supportive resources for people at every stage. Okay, so all of that said, as Megan said earlier, today we are going to nerd out on all things reading instruction and phonics, the hows, the whys, and even some suggested resources and curriculum at the end. And even if your kids are already reading, you probably want to stick around because I'm pretty sure you'll learn something new, something that might just end up being your WTF moment for the week.
Oh, definitely. 100%. This is more Amanda's jam than mine. So she recommended a podcast for me to listen to ahead of today's recording. And originally I was like, okay, I have a super crazy week. I'll just zip through it. I'll get the high points so that I'm prepared for recording. Oh, no. I was hooked. First 5 to 10 minutes of the first episode, I have pages of notes from this podcast. My youngest child is almost 15. I'm not teaching phonics, but it was fantastic. Okay. All my kids can read. I'm well beyond the days of needing phonics instruction, but the history of reading instruction and the neuroscience of it all were freaking fascinating. So definitely stick around. But
Yeah.
first, we begin all of our episodes with a weekly recap. It's part of our kind of behind the scenes of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered and part of our anti-influencer stance where we don't gloss over the messy bits or the part that makes us look like anything less than absolutely perfect. We will air out our dirty laundry for you like pretty much no influencer ever would dare. So, how's your week been, Amanda?
Wait, I feel like that's a bad lead up to me saying my week's not bad, actually.
Okay. The good, the
Yeah.
bad, some weeks are good. It's a balanced perspective of homeschooling and life. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyone who's been listening for a while is like, thank God she stopped complaining. So, I mean, the thing is, we still have a pretty nice groove going. It took us a minute to get it, but we're there. I still wish I had way more free time, but alas, I think that's a pipe dream until the day I finally tell Megan I'm out. I'm done with Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Then I'm going to suddenly be like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to be rested. Yeah. So this past month, the July unit study, if you're one of the people who gets our monthly unit studies or you're waiting for us to announce it so you can go pick it up, it didn't drop until pretty late because we had a lot going on. But that meant that we basically rolled straight into putting together the August unit study. I'm almost done with my part of it, which is great because I want to get the August newsletter that goes out over on Patreon to everyone who follows us over there. I want to get it written and hopefully out by the time you're actually listening to this episode, because we fly out for our Machu Picchu trip like a week after that time frame. And I'm really hoping to have just a nice, easy week without too much stress leading up to that, because stress and even a lot of talking and stuff like that messes up my whole body because I have dysautonomia. And so I'm just hoping for a really just mellow, still waters week before we go on this really big, challenging trip. We'll see. Oh, though I will say I am pretty close to having our 2026, 2027 plans nailed down. So I don't know for sure if it'll be in a week, maybe 2 weeks from now, because in another week, then you'd have to just listening to me yammer on. That might be too much for some people. But soon we'll have our annual Amanda's curriculum plan episode so people can kind of follow along. I'm not entirely sure why people are that interested in me and what we're doing, but they are asking for it. So we'll try to make sure we get it out there. And it's coming along. I am almost done planning things. So, well, anyway, we'll see if it all comes together before Peru or after Peru. I'm not putting any money on anything at this point. So anyway, how's your week going?
It's good. Yeah, it's okay. It's funny because we've had kind of in our queue of upcoming episodes, the 2026, 2027 plan. And whenever we're getting ready to record, I say to Amanda, no pressure, but are you feeling? And she's like, no, I'm not there. I'm not there yet. I'm like, okay, we'll just bump it down the list again. It's totally fine. We'll do something else from the queue. We have plenty of topics to talk about. It's not a big deal. So
It'll be October. I'll be like, I finally got it figured out.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Yeah. I mean, here, oh man, my kids are kind of coming and going, right? I'm prepping for my oldest two to both go on separate trips. One's going to camp, one's going to a weaving conference. By the time you're listening to this, my oldest will be getting ready to come back from camp, I guess. I don't know. There's going to be a period here for a while where only one kid is home out of three because they're kind of coming and going at odd intervals. So that's a little chaotic, but it's fine. It's all working. And I'm really glad they're having those opportunities this summer. It's all stuff they're excited about and that they love. So go enjoy. I've been working on finding a tutor for my daughter because when she comes back from the US, she's bringing a microscope with her for a project that she's planning to work on. It's a year-long thing where she's planning to do a study, an intensive study on some fibers, and then basically write a nonfiction memoir of her learning journey through these kind of obscure fibers. But she's not super microscope proficient. She's used them a little bit here and there at like the science center if we went for a homeschool day or something like that. So, and this is a pretty badass microscope that she's bringing back. So like she's going to need some guidance on how to use it and how to measure. And there's some software that goes with it and stuff like that. So we have to work on that. So yeah, like Amanda said, we've been working on our American history unit study series. It's a total of 4 altogether by the time we're done. And they've kind of been running into one another because we have so much going on. But I love researching. If you listened to last week's episode, you know I love unit studies and preparing units. So It's fun. It's just a lot. It's just trying to Tetris it into the day and the rest of the schedule of what's going on and all that stuff. So yeah, that's good. My summer book club that I'm leading, we're about to start The Nightingale. If you don't know, I lead a teen book club. We only read historical fiction with really badass feminist leads. And so this summer we're doing some bonus books. We're about to read The Nightingale, which is my favorite book of all time. And I cry every single time I read it. In fact, my housekeeper takes off for the entire month of August because welcome to Europe. Like everyone takes off, even your housekeeper. And I actually have a copy of it in Portuguese on order for her at the bookstore so that she can take it with her when she goes on holiday for the month. And I'll be like, here's some reading for you. I should give her some tissues to go with it too, but it's amazing. So if you have a teen who loves reading, doesn't love reading, loves history, doesn't love history, send them to me. We'll have fun no matter what their starting point is. We'll have the best time ever. The fall semester starts end of August, I think. We have some good books picked out. Yeah. And then my gym journey continues. We've been having fun. We've been trying out new classes. My daughter's also a member of the same gym. We went to AirFit today, which is the trampolining class. It used to be called rebounding. I think that was the original name for it when it was first introduced. It's called AirFit here. And I did have some concerns going into it about the state of my pelvic floor. And I did take some precautionary measures. Thank goodness, because that will be my last trampolining class. Shooting 3 human heads out of my body and their big honking shoulders in less than 4 years was just nothing my pelvic floor was about to recover from ever, apparently. So yeah, one and done, trampolining. I'll be back at body pump after this, but overall it was good. So still had fun, but you know, it was a situation. Anywho, back to phonics and instruction there. All things reading, decoding, neuroscience of reading, so much more. I am basically going to turn this hour over to Amanda and just let her rock this episode. This is kind of like when you take your kids to Disney World or something that they just freaking love and you're having your own fun because it's a fun experience. But then watching your kids have fun is actually more fun than your firsthand fun. It fills your cup even more than your own experience. And so that's going to be this episode for me today. I'm just going to be like, have fun, Amanda. And I'm just going to be so happy for her having a blast.
All right. Again, that's a lot of pressure, but okay, let's do this. All right. So first, I would love for everyone who's listening to take a minute and try to think back. How did you learn to read? Was there a strong emphasis on sounding out every word you didn't know? Or was the emphasis more on using context clues to figure out a word you didn't know? Was the emphasis on a decodable book? Or did you have leveled readers, those like AR books or things like that? I know for me, when I was preschool age, my grandma was teaching me to read using phonics. But then once I started school, they focused on the cueing method, which is this idea like, look at the pictures, think about what the book is talking about, and then guess the word that might finish that sentence well. And the first few years of elementary school were rough for me. It took me some time to figure out how to read well using the cueing method. Now, I'm incredibly fortunate because the research shows that only about 40% of kids can ultimately figure out how to read well using the cueing method. But I did eventually figure it out, and I now love reading, right? Though I will say my kiddo absolutely makes fun of me for being a much slower reader than he is. And I think that part of that is that thing of like, you don't just read the words because you can easily decode them all. Anytime you come up to something new, you're slowing down to make sure you can look at the context and you don't have easy pictures in the corner like you did when you were a kid. So suddenly it's a lot harder to use context clues. You don't have as many of them. But I know for me, I didn't really learn phonics until my freshman year of college. I went back home to my rural Iowa hometown and got a spring break job. And then again in the summer at a camp. It was set up for struggling readers in my small town. It was hosted at the local church because that's how those things work in rural communities. And the little old lady who ran it absolutely insisted that all of the kids coming through be helped with phonics, which meant she had to first teach me phonics. So the first thing I remember her teaching me was that we would never sing the ABC song. And instead, we would sing the phonics version of it. So it's like, ah, and I was like, what in the world is this business? And I went looking on YouTube. I couldn't even find a version that was just like that. I have no idea where she found it. Now it's all apple. Anyway, after I learned from this camp, this summer job that I had, I took these same skills I learned to tutor math and reading through a work study program in inner city schools in Chicago when I went back to school. But the thing is, along the way, no one ever taught me how or why it worked. It was just that if kids were struggling with reading, try teaching them phonics. That's what I had. How about you, Megan? Do you remember how you learned to read or at what point you became familiar with phonics?
I mean, not really. I'm incredibly impressed that you remember that you were learning the cueing method in kindergarten. I barely remember kindergarten. I remember that I learned how to put my coat on in kindergarten and that thing where you put it upside down and then you do that weird maneuver where you flip it up and over your head. That's what I remember learning in kindergarten.
I had a traumatic kindergarten experience,
Oh,
and
that's
my
fine.
first grade teacher was like really good at helping turn things around. But that is why, because we remember either super random things or the really
Mhm.
traumatic things.
Yeah, that's
There you
true.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do have a distinct memory of "sound it out." That phrase was 100% drilled into my
Mm,
brain. So it could be entirely possible that some of the other techniques that you're going to be discussing today were in the mix, but
mm.
the one that stuck in my head was "sound it out."
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about the whole thing. I think a lot of people either think I learned to read just fine without phonics, or they don't even know what phonics really is, or they might think phonics is boring and kind of tedious. And I'd rather my littles just focus on enjoying reading. But again, kind of like I mentioned earlier, the problem with that is that research estimates as many as 60% of kids can't learn to be fluent readers without direct, explicit phonics based instruction.
Yeah, I had no idea. I thought I taught my oldest kiddo how to read because I would read to him, with him. We watched so much Leapfrog that those songs are implanted into the, I don't know, the fibers of my brain or whatever. And then it seemed like one day he just started reading. And not a little. It was one of those Grand Canyon sized leaps that kids can
Mhm.
sometimes make with anything. And I was pretty proud of myself for teaching him to read. I was like, I have done an excellent job here. Then my daughter came along and they're 15 months apart. So I did the same thing. It was soon thereafter. My methodology hadn't changed. And that was when I realized 100% I did not teach the first kid how to read. He had a lot of exposure. And then his 2E brain was like, I will take it from here. Thank you very much. I don't drink, but teaching my daughter to read had me thinking this might be a good new hobby that I should explore because oh, eventually she got there and I never did take up drinking. But
Pity.
the journey was it was a lot. Then by the time my youngest rolled around, I was fully into unschooling mode at that point, and it went really similarly to how my oldest went. Tons and tons of exposure, and then the kid just read and never stopped. But it was funny because in preparing for this episode, I realized that I totally taught my kids phonics. Leapfrog is phonics. Amanda likes to tease me for the kiddie soundtracks that I always had playing when my kids were younger, because in the car we always had little kid music on, and in the house we just always had this kind of things. And there were so many phonics songs that were mixed in to our various playlists. We had colors and numbers and everything else in there too, but there was so much phonics that was in there. We didn't do a ton of screen learning, but with 3 kids so close in age, every once in a while you do need some options in the mix where you can just be like, here, do this thing. So mind you, this was a long time ago, so I'm not sure how current some of these recommendations are. But on the iPad, there was a Starfall app that the kids liked that was phonics based. We had Reading Eggs, another phonics program. And when we'd read together and they got stuck, I'd pass on the only thing that I knew, which was sound it out. And I didn't realize that there was any other option for how to teach kids to read or how incredibly prevalent those options are in the United States. And I'm going to be honest, I did not realize any of this stuff until Amanda recommended this podcast that she had me listen to called Sold Me a Story. And I was really the whole time just working off of instinct and familiarity when I worked with my kids with reading. And it happened to be phonics. So lucky them, lucky me.
Yeah, that worked out quite nicely. Though I'm going to admit, I have a much longer story, and I was introduced to the idea of phonics at this point a few decades ago. But I really didn't know a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today in this episode until listening to that podcast, Sold a Story, several years ago when it first came out. One of the things that I did know was that we had decided to send our kiddo to a Montessori kindergarten. I've talked about it before on the podcast, which was actually a 5 to 7-year-old classroom because that's Montessori style. But anyway, we went to Montessori when we first transitioned from an incredibly free play based childhood into more traditional, okay, now it's time to go off to school. But his Montessori school that he decided to go to started at 18 months. And from that point on, kids started learning basic phonics. That's the Montessori style. You have the letters and you're putting them together with the sounds, and it's a whole thing. So when the school accepted us, they were like, he's absolutely welcome here. We love him. He's wonderful, but he is going to have to be able to read before he starts in September. And I was like, really? Okay. So a little bit of panic. And then I did what made the most sense. I spent the summer before he started kindergarten using phonics and decodable readers to teach my kid the basics of reading. There are these super affordable, bright, colorful little phonics workbooks. We'll talk about them a little later in the show and drop the link. But we started with those. We did some Bob books. We did some more enjoyable, decodable readers from Usborne. And then I sent him off to school so they could finish teaching him to be a confident reader. But his progress slowed down, which is the opposite of what I thought was going to happen. I thought for sure some positive peer pressure would really move things along. He's going to have access to new books. He's going to have all of these classmates that are already reading. And he's just going to be like, oh, well, let me get in on that. And then in March of his kindergarten year, he got sent home because of COVID. It was March 2020. So I start seeing his reading lessons on Zoom because they transitioned to that. And I'm like, it's supposed to be phonics, but it's got a lot more guess the word stuff than I think it should. Now I know that that's called whole language and 3Qing, but I was like, okay, it's clearly not working. I don't know why they're trying to teach him to read this way. So I signed up for the $1 free trial of Hooked on Phonics. And a month later, he's finished the entire online Hooked on Phonics program. And his teacher's like, wow, it finally clicked for him. And he really gets reading now. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Good job. Way to go, teach. So the next year, after a lot of research, I pick up All About Reading to use with him because I really wasn't willing to risk it for another school year. I was not willing to send him back and be like, are they going to do phonics? Are they going to do this other? Guess what the word is? You don't need to know how to sound it out. And that's where we were.
Yeah, that's not a surprise to me because we've done enough coaching sessions together that I'm clued into the fact that All About Reading is an Orton Gillingham aligned, explicit phonics based instruction. It's multisensory. If you listen to our recent episode that we did with Lindsay on dyslexia, you might remember us talking about how useful that can be for dyslexic kiddos as well. I guess if you're going to expand on that thought, an Orton Gillingham phonics curriculum that's multimodal is kind of a best practice version of reading instruction when you're talking about the science of reading. And it will work for the vast majority of kids without hurting anything. It's a nice, safe
Well,
choice.
yeah, exactly. And that's it, because that type of systematic, explicit reading instruction works for the vast, vast majority of kids. And it doesn't hurt the kids it doesn't work for, unlike some of the other methods. And because we're not like, trust us, it worked for us people, we are going to get into some of the background and the actual research supporting this. And then if you want full links, you can absolutely go check out the show notes. There'll be links and things like that there, because we like to cite our sources, at least to some extent. But okay, we are going to do our best to stay high level and not let this turn into a 6-hour podcast, because Sold a Story is 6 hours and they didn't even get into recommendations. So we're going to cover the fascinating history of reading wars as quickly as I can figure out how to, which, let's be real, we all know that's not going to be very quick.
Oh, yeah. So this is what the podcast Sold a Story really gets into. And like I said, I had a bananas week this week. So I was just like, I'm going to blow through this for research purposes, maybe cherry pick episodes and just make sure I've got enough for this episode. Oh, no, absolutely not. I put it on when I walked out my front door on Tuesday, and I was only going somewhere 10 minutes away from the house. And within that 10 minutes, I was like completely hooked. I had already started a notepad in my phone. And then I listened to the entire thing within 24 hours. I was like, I'm in. This is amazing.
That's it. We don't have time to cover it all, but if you have the time or even the tiniest inkling of interest, you should go give it a listen, because it's it's jaw dropping, honestly. So for anyone who doesn't know about the podcast in general, in a nutshell, it talks about how the whole language reading theory and the 3 cueing reading theories, like how they came to be, how they became super popularized, really without much actual research to support their use, and how the authors and education experts who promoted and popularized them claimed the science of reading was wrong because, quote, no one gets to own the word science, end quote, according to Lucy Calkins, and, quote, my science is different, end quote, according to Ken Goodman. Oh, and another one of my favorites, leave teachers alone. They don't need the government and scientists to tell them what to do. I'm like, look, I'm not saying that scientists would make the best teachers, but there's a lot to be said for using the information we get out of peer-reviewed research and studies to lead us in a better direction towards education.
Yeah. I mean, Sold a Story just had so many interviews and speeches with these gems of science denial in there that were mind blowing. My favorite line in the whole series was one person who had this super dismissive opinion that, quote, letters are only one way to identify a word, end quote. And I was like, what the actual fuck? Letters make words. You need to know what those letters form when they're clumped together like that to form a word. I mean, that would be like, ingredients are only one way to make bread. You can imagine making the bread. You can role play making the bread. You can look at pictures of bread online. And all of those things will satisfy your hunger just as much as eating your own homemade bread. It's like, no, you need flour and water and yeast. That's how you make bread. Letters are words. You need the letters. They're important to the words. I was like, oh my gosh. And then there was that statement about leaving teachers alone because they don't need the government and scientists telling them what to do. Well, number one, what kind of educator doesn't want data to know that they're doing the right thing? I mean, that alone is kind of a red flag. But unfortunately, in the podcast, there were tons of educators who did not want the data. They were like, I have been following this thing for years and this is what it is and I'm not switching, and et cetera, et cetera. And then number two, the teachers had and have, really, because this is still going on, these methods are still being used.
Yeah.
But they had no idea why they were teaching reading the way they are. They were just trusting the fact that someone checked this and that this tool that they were being given was correct. And again, we support teachers, and we know that there are way more good teachers than there are ones that you would cringe if your kid got assigned to their class. And we know that they're wildly overworked and criminally underpaid. But how incurious can you be to just take a program and be like, well, this is apparently the thing. This is my whole existence now. I'm married to this, and no amount of science that you ever show me can change that. And I'm like, you're an educator. And I get it. You're overworked, you're underpaid. I get that that's obviously going to influence this whole situation as it would for anyone. But I'm like, you never questioned anything? It just was like, okay.
Well, I want to know about the administrators whose primary job is to pick curriculum and pay millions of dollars
Mhm.
for various curriculum, and they never got around to being like, let me just double check the research on this. Does it actually do what it says? Are they just like get out their educational publisher book and flip through like, this one looks good? Like, I don't. Okay, so we can't go in to a phonics episode without sharing at least a bit of the down and dirty overview of the history that got us here. So let's do that again as quickly as I can. So we'll see how quickly that actually is. So when the US was first founded, reading instruction wasn't all that common. And when it was done, it focused on a lot of religious texts. And then that ended up expanding to include great works and important speeches. Obviously, not super riveting for the elementary set. By the mid to late 1800s, they started talking about how education should be more available and equitable. Again, obviously not for people of color, enslaved people, or women, but also not just for the most wealthy and most privileged. And so at this point, we start seeing the introduction of more accessible type of reading instruction, which is what we call phonics. This idea of focusing on the rules of letters, the silent E's that say the other vowel's name, and that sort of stuff. This grows and continues to gain in popularity well into the mid 1900s. Hence the reason that my grandma, who grew up during the Great Depression, was teaching me to read using phonics. So in the 1940s and 50s, we start to see the introduction and push towards whole word philosophy. This means memorizing words visually, like a word is essentially a picture, and you memorize the whole word instead of decoding the individual letters in a word. Meaning comes first. So if a child reads, that is my pony, when the sentence actually says, that is my horse, it's totally okay because horse and pony are essentially the same thing and they got the meaning and now we can move on. Okay, now listen, don't come for me. I'm not saying that they are the same thing. I'm explaining the theory with examples that the actual experts in the theory used themselves. Okay, so don't come for me. I know there's a difference between a horse and a pony. And then the third thing is context clues. So kids' books almost always have pictures. And in this theory, they start adding more pictures to make sure that the teachers can encourage the kids to look at the pictures, but then also think about what action might be appropriate in a story to guess what word is missing. And when I say missing, I mean they would literally cover a word with a sticky note and then use context clues to guess what word would make the most sense, led by the teacher. And then she'd remove the sticky note and be like, you're so amazing. You read the right word. I'm not positive I would call that reading, but that's a whole other thing. So by the 1980s and 90s, the whole language movement, and as it's often called in the US, the 3Qing method, starts really taking off. It takes off partly because it's rebranded as this new great thing and it's lovely and it's all about immersing children in authentic literature and allowing kids to develop reading naturally because they get to curl up with a good book and just enjoy looking at a book and enjoy the feeling of spending time with the book. And again, it encourages prediction from pictures and context, but that also meant that the books for curriculum based on this philosophy were visually appealing to kids. Kids were more excited to pick them up and look at them or read them. And the curriculum came with a bunch of new books. So if you could get your school district to buy into this curriculum, you had a whole bunch of new books for your kids. Fantastic. And look, it wasn't completely wrong. Whole language philosophy says that authentic books matter and that motivation matters. and also that comprehension and writing matter. And I don't think any of us are like, no, 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 we don't want any of those things. Those are good things. Unfortunately, peer-reviewed research found that many struggling readers never developed efficient decoding skills if phonics instruction was limited or inconsistent. And this is where, again, that whole 60% of people don't become proficient readers without systemic phonics instruction really comes into play.
Yeah. So while this whole language thing is really taking off with teachers, we've got scientists over here going, they say there's research and studies supporting this, but they are really limited. So let's do some more research just to prove that this works. But of course, they found it doesn't actually work. And this is where it gets a little messy. So politics enters the chat when it comes to reading. Democrats in the United States really embraced this new, gentle, pretty, aesthetic version of reading. And they, maybe a bit blindly, believed the experts like Fountas and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins, who were saying that it was backed by research while simultaneously selling their programs. So in the late 90s, the Bush family gets really involved in the reading crisis in the United States. And it starts with Barbara, who recognizes the ties between literacy and unemployment. And then by the time the second Bush becomes president, he is like, listen, reading instruction in public schools has to be entirely science based, which means phonics. And really, this shouldn't be a huge surprise because when he was the governor of Texas, reading reform was a huge priority for him as governor. And then I'm going to assume that if his mother was championing reading, it was probably heavily interwoven into their family culture. And then on top of it, he's married to a woman who's got a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in library science, who worked in schools as a teacher and a librarian. So, you're sitting down at the dinner table at the end of it, like, how was your day? And she's debriefing about her day. You're going to learn a whole lot about the struggles and the successes and the new things and what's happening, etc. But as things go in the United States, and probably in other places in the world, we're just most familiar with the United States, even making sure kids are literate comes down to party lines in the United States. And it's not hard to imagine how many people, including teachers and massive school districts in major metropolitan areas, were like, oh, this is a Bush initiative? Never mind, we're out.
Yeah, exactly. Like if George W. Bush is pushing it, we're not doing it. Full
Yeah.
stop. We like to pretend that the current political polarization in the US is new, but it's been around a long time. And the whole Gore, Bush, Florida, hanging Chads thing left a lot of liberals wanting absolutely nothing to do with Bush on principle. It would not have mattered how much data or science or research you brought to the table. If it was coming from Bush, they just wanted nothing to do with it because he stole the election in Florida. So you have that. And then you've got 9/11 and domestic initiatives. They just get a lot less everything, right? I mean, that was not the focus in the United States after 9/11. So when Obama comes in and he's all, I'm going to fix the reading crisis. Like, okay, great. We've got another president who's going to fix the reading crisis. And he's going to do it by requiring explicit phonics instruction in reading curriculum. And this time it gets shut down by lobbyists for educational publishers and legal teams for the experts that file formal complaints because explicit phonics instruction isn't what has been out there and what they sell and what they've been doing. It works just fine. And we know it doesn't work just fine. But now we've got more than 40 years of research on how to best teach reading, and yet it still isn't being implemented in the vast majority of schools in the US. And then we wonder why we've got a decades-long reading crisis on our hands. And because even before Facebook, people loved drama, it becomes now known as the reading wars. The whole idea of the reading wars was kind of solidified around this false dichotomy. Reading instruction was often framed, and still is often framed, as phonics or literature, decoding or comprehension, skills acquired via a boring classroom drill, or joy nurtured in cozy free reading time. But obviously, the research shows that it's just a false choice. Children need both. They need systematic decoding instruction and meaningful reading experiences. This is not complicated. It's kind of one of those things. Like, if we think about it, it makes sense. At the end of the day, phonics is important, but phonics alone isn't sufficient. It's not hard to understand that children also need vocabulary, knowledge, conversation, writing, read alouds, curiosity. They need all of those things to become great readers.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, you talk about phonics all the time, which I love to tease you for, but it's in good spirit because I'm like, talk about phonics, have the best time ever. But you really encourage parents and caregivers that we're working with or that we're having conversations with in our communities and our coaching sessions, those who are bringing their kids home from brick and mortar schools, to double check that their kids are strong in phonics, because a lot of times if they're coming out of a brick and mortar classroom, they aren't. And in that Sold a Story podcast, they talk about how even if a curriculum is using both phonics and cueing, the cueing is kind of like a bad habit that overrides the phonics instruction. So it's almost
Yeah.
like it didn't even happen. But no matter what, reading instruction in elementary school doesn't stop with teaching phonics. There's so much more that goes into teaching your kiddo how to read. I know you're not a read aloud fan. I don't really mind them. I tend to get a little sleepy when we do a read aloud, but my kids have never liked them. So I was saved from them. They are much more content to go get lost in their own book. They don't want to read a family book and have to be stuck at the pace of the family. If they want to spend 7 hours in a day reading a book, they want to spend 7 hours a day. They're like, I'm not waiting for you, right?
Yeah.
But both of our kids love audiobooks and podcasts.
Mhm.
Just the other day, we did a joint coaching session where you were talking about the shift in upper elementary away from spelling and more into vocabulary. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's so important. There's so many pieces to this puzzle, and they have to be the
Mhm.
right pieces. Yeah, you can't just
Well,
jam them all
yeah.
together. Yeah, you can't take like
Yeah.
the parts and pieces from 5 different puzzles and try to jam them together and be like, "Look, it's a new animal that I created with the head of a horse and pig's feet and whatever else," and they're all smushed together. Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Well, that's it.
Ah,
And so many people don't understand that. Reading, it's not just phonics, but phonics is one of the first pieces.
yeah, exactly. And we'll discuss some of the other parts and all the science and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. But before we do, real quick, if you're listening to this and you have a little peanut who hasn't started reading yet, and you're like, I want to make sure that I do not screw this up. I need to make sure that this is good. Amanda's going to give you some recommendations. But if you want, you can also just book a coaching session with her. She does curriculum planning and she'll go deep into phonics and how your kid learns, especially if there's neurodivergence in the mix and all that kind of stuff. We both offer coaching sessions on tons and tons of stuff. But if you're looking for curriculum and phonics help, Amanda's your person. If you brought a kiddo home from school, or you've been homeschooling all along and you just didn't know any of this, because we didn't know this stuff when we started necessarily, that's okay. It's never too late to go back and fill in gaps and course correct a little bit. But if you're looking for a really strategic plan on how to do that in a way that makes sense, again, go talk to Amanda. There'll be a link in the show notes. You can go to homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com. Go. If you want to come talk about hippie stuff and transcripts, come hang out with me. But if it's about phonics and curriculum, do not come talk to me. That is an Amanda situation. So yeah. But anyway, I'm excited because we have more to talk about. And the shit show of this, it's kind of like watching a Real Housewives episode where it just snowballs and gets worse and worse and worse. That's how I feel about the reading situation after doing all this research for this episode. So I'm like, yes, let's get into it. This is like the reunion show at the end of the Real Housewives series where Andy Cohen is like, that's the reading situation. So let's do it.
Okay, so back to this idea that there's a lot more to learning to read. That's what's generally called the science of reading. The science of reading is not a specific curriculum. It's an approach, a philosophy that is based on a really large body of research spanning from psychology and neuroscience and linguistics to education and cognitive science. There's a ton in it. And according to the science of reading, the core areas that need to be taught so kids have the best chance at becoming truly proficient, successful readers include these 5 areas. So there's explicit phonemic awareness, and that is the understanding of the sounds spoken words have. So when we are talking, we know the word cat has 3 sounds, ka, at. When we say the word duck, well, as grown-ups, we probably know that it has 4 letters in it. It also has 3 sounds in it. And that's that phonemic awareness, the number of sounds, unique sounds in a word.
Sorry. I'm just
Go ahead.
laughing so hard when you said, as grown-ups, most of us know that duck has 4. And all I could think of was that interview with Trump recently where he was like, a lot of people don't know that dumb has a letter B at the end of it. I mean, a lot of people don't know this. And I was
A
like,
lot of people.
I mean, a lot of people
Oh.
don't, but okay, that's where we're at. Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I would hope more people know it than don't, but maybe not.
And the fact that
Probably.
you were impressed that you know this is really upsetting. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, that you feel
Yeah.
that this is bragging rights. We have a problem here. Sorry.
I know this,
Anyway, I wonder if he knows there's a K at the end of duck. I'm not sure.
or a C in the middle.
Exactly. He'd be shocked.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
4 letters in that word. 4 letters.
Jesus. Okay. All right, so then after that, the next piece is the systematic phonics. Now, the phonemic awareness can be taught at the same time as systematic phonics, but they don't have to be. Systematic phonics is that process of teaching letter sound relationships explicitly and sequentially. So you're moving beyond just what you hear and you're saying, look, this is the letter C and C has the sound K. That's systematic phonics. Of course, you're going through more than just the letter C. After that, you have fluency. And this just means practicing a lot, decoding things until it becomes automatic. This is also one area where leveled readers often fall short. A lot of times we see people who are like, well, we're homeschooling, but I can't find leveled readers. A lot, though certainly not all, leveled readers get their levels based on topics. So, like, what are kids interested in? More so than if the words are easily decodable or if they require more advanced phonics rules. It's a real problem. I could go into all kinds of books and other studies and things that look at this specific issue with leveled readers. It's nutty. Again, like all of this stuff wrapped up in the way that we've been doing things for so long. So anyway, after that, it leads into vocabulary. And this is one of those things that's a bit of a common sense thing that we don't always think about until someone actually points it out. And then you're like, oh yeah, I mean, of course. But kids need to know what words mean for comprehension. The bigger the vocabulary, the greater the comprehension. Vocabulary can be built in so many ways, from reading with parents to conversations to exposure to new things and new hobbies and new ideas to even that sometimes dreaded activity of look the word up. You don't know what that is? Look it up. And that leads into the final piece that the science of reading kind of talks about, and that is that comprehension piece. The ability to identify or assign bigger meaning to passages, not just individual word sounds or individual word meanings, I know in our home, we talk a lot about how comprehension is about stepping back and understanding the bigger picture, sometimes even reading between the lines for context and meaning, and not just quoting back what the book said. And this is a skill that absolutely takes work and improves significantly with age and maturity. There is a level of development that has to happen. You are not going to see, for the vast majority of kids anyway, a grasp of phonics and a really solid grasp of comprehension at the same time. The comprehension you expect at the time that they're learning phonics is going to be much more age and developmentally appropriate. And then as they're hitting upper elementary and middle and even into high school, you're seeing more and more deeper comprehension. That's that idea of science of reading. It takes years to become incredibly fluent, proficient readers, but phonics is such an important early part of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm listening to all of this and thinking maybe the fact that we've had a few generations now that didn't learn to read with the science of reading philosophy that you're talking about might explain why so many Americans can't seem to understand the difference between personal opinions and facts. We never got proficient in fluency, which ultimately ended up limiting both vocabulary and overall comprehension. Like, whew. There was an example in the podcast about a kid who was using all these bonkers strategies to just guess words. And he saw a word with an I, an N, and a V, and was like, invited. Great. Sure. I know that word. So he took a guess based upon the letters that he interpreted. I don't even know because I can't fathom a world where you're reading words without looking at all the letters because I didn't learn that way and my brain's not processing that. But anyway, so invited is the word he ends up with. So in context, the sentence was in 1939, Germany invited Poland. And that's not what happened. As our resident history nerd here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, you literally changed the entire course of history by changing invaded to invited with your stupid guessing techniques. I'm not saying the kid's technique was stupid. I'm saying the techniques he was taught were stupid. But yeah, but it makes sense. I can absolutely see how all five components come together to really create strong readers and how missing any of those pieces weakens the system. I think a lot of people are missing more than one of those pieces based upon the education that they received. And I really do wonder how exactly we got to the point where some people are convinced that the science of reading is just this drill and kill phonics methodology that should be avoided. Like, what?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the science of reading and even systematic explicit phonics instruction doesn't automatically equal boring or tedious or regimented or anything of the sorts. In fact, learning to decode words efficiently, it allows children to actually enjoy reading, whether that's high quality literature or age appropriate graphic novels or even their favorite weekly magazine. The enjoyment of being able to sit down and read something for yourself or the shame of not being able to doesn't seem like a hard choice for me. And the science of reading, again, starting with phonemic awareness and phonics, it helps kids and eventually adults think critically and access the ideas that matter the most.
Yeah. Okay. So you stuck with us. You're like, all right, I get it. I get it. I should teach phonics. I got it. But also, if you didn't learn phonics in school or you don't remember learning it, you might be like, I have no idea how to teach this to my kid. How do I do this? And please don't leave me hanging. Please tell me there's more coming. And so, yes, we would never leave you hanging. We, and by that, I mean Amanda, have some suggestions for you.
Absolutely. Okay. But now I will say that it gets a little bit tricky here because it is great to start the phonemic awareness and basic phonics with young kids. But also, there is a real push in the United States to start phonics-based reading programs in kindergarten at the latest. And while there are some full programs that I think are great, I also think it's way better to start them in first grade when your kiddo is closer to 6.5 or 7. So, with that in mind, what do we recommend? Okay, so you can absolutely keep it play based. We talked about all sorts of play based options in our recent play based learning episode. Those are all appropriate for preschool and kindergarten aged kiddos. If you're open to a bit of screen time, especially if it's educational screen time, there are lots of video options for phonics. I know in our home, we preferred Meet the Phonics from Preschool Prep Company because it's a little less stimulating, both what you hear and what you see on the screen. But there are lots of other options. If you're a fan of Miss Rachel, she's got lots of phonics video options for toddlers and preschoolers. And now, Megan, I know you mentioned some programs you used earlier in the episode, but do you have any specific phonics things or methods that you want to share?
Yeah. Aside from reading Eggs and Starfall, we weren't using curriculum per se, but I had a gazillion ways of incorporating phonics and literacy as a whole into our lives. I had a set of those Melissa and Doug wooden letters. Actually, I had two sets because I had the uppercase and the lowercase because I'm fancy like that.
Very
I had the magnetic fridge letters, the colorful plastic ones. We would use them on cookie sheets because so many refrigerators aren't magnetic anymore, which is so sad. We had these laminated phonics activity. I wouldn't call them worksheets. I would call them play sheets because they really weren't worksheets in the traditional sense. But I would laminate them and they would have letters missing out of words and stuff. And they were meant for Play Doh so that you could form like a letter A out of Play Doh and fill it in. And that's why I laminated them. We had things with fly swatters where we would do like cat for your example from before, and I'd have a whole bunch of letters out and they would hit C and then A and then T with a fly swatter. We would do things with bingo markers because, man, that's just so much more fun than using anything else. And they're big and fat, so they're great for little hands when you're talking about pre-writing. You name it, we had it, but it was all fun and loose and hands-on, and it involved a ton of movement, and it was no pressure and organic. It was just a matter of making this literacy and phonics rich environment available to them regularly, very regularly. So that's just how we did it. It wasn't a structured anything, but it happened. It worked.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's nice. We didn't do that. If you've listened to other episodes, we didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. We had loads of books, but I
Mhm.
was really trying to stick to such a free play, kiddo led childhood until it was time for him to start school. So we didn't have a ton of those kinds of activities because he wasn't printing off letters and fly swatters to figure it out. He was playing with Duplos and train track things. But all right. So while neither one of us would really recommend getting curriculum for preschool or kindergarten, because once you have a curriculum, the temptation to rush academics becomes just so much stronger. I will say, if you really, really, really feel that you need something to help you and you want a curriculum that will walk you through phonics step by step, maybe look at either Meadowlark Preschool, okay, preschool, or the Playing Preschool curriculum. And again, these are totally fine to use for kindergarten too. They're play-based, they're really slow. You don't need to be getting on anything else. You don't need to make sure you're doing any of the handwriting activities in there at this age. You do not need to rush formal academics. We promise, we pinky swear. The research on it is really strong. If you need a reminder, go back to that play-based episode.
Yeah. Or we have another episode called What the Fuck Did We Do to Kindergarten? And we covered a ton of research in there. You could check out our early education course, Preschool and Kindergarten Reimagined. It's full of support for how to tackle those first years of homeschooling in a healthy, balanced, fulfilling way. And we cited all of the studies that we're telling you
Mm.
this advice is based on in these different things. So it's not just us making things up, but we'll drop the link in the show notes. But you can also just go to our website, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, and you can get anywhere from that homepage, basically. But I think when you were talking about having a curriculum for preschool to have a plan, it reminds me of when my oldest was ready to start eating purees and I made all of my own baby food. And I bought a book on how to do this thing. And I was a young mom. It's your first kid. You're trying not to screw things up, all this kind of stuff, right? The book was literally steam carrots, blend carrots, steam peas, blend peas. And I was like, this is a book. Someone wrote this book. I had no idea how not complicated this was. You know what I mean? And so I bought it. The one thing that it was helpful was it told me save cruciferous vegetables for a little bit later because they could be a little rough on their tummy. Okay, fine. That was beneficial, but I don't know that I needed the $14.99 book for that information. And so I feel the same way about the preschool curriculums because I get you're trying not to screw things up, but it's kind of like steam carrots, blend carrots. You can do this. It's okay.
You can. Although that reminds me, when I bought the How to Make Your Own Baby Food book, mine was like, oh, make sure you roast the carrots so that you have different flavor profiles. And if you're going to do cauliflower, definitely add curry powder so that it's more interesting. My kiddo had really bougie food by the time he was 7, 8 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That would have been like 5, 6 years after. Maybe that one wasn't available. When I was buying the steamed carrots, blend carrots book, I don't know, but I was like, I can't believe I spent money on this. You know?
But I also think most people aren't like, how do I best blend my seasonings for the baby food puree I'm making? Like,
Yeah.
it was a thing. I was already in Southern California. We're going to blame it on that.
Back to phonics. Okay, we're pretty deep into this episode. We're like an hour into this episode, and you haven't brought up Hooked on Phonics yet. And I'm kind of surprised by this because I know you're a fangirl of Hooked on Phonics. What's happening here?
Well, I mean, I did low key promote it when I was
Dropped
talking
it.
about my kiddo. Yeah. So it was the smooth sale. It's not really a sale because we're not even affiliates with Hooked on Phonics. But look, Hooked on Phonics, it has been around for a long time. And because of that, a lot of people ignore it. But it's still a great option, especially because they almost always have a $1 for the first month trial. And we all know I love a free trial. So yeah, for $1, it's not quite free, but it's basically free. They have hard copy resources that they actually mail you once a month if you keep the subscription. But I have to say, if you listen to us regularly, you know I don't love a lot of screen time, but I was surprisingly most impressed with their online program. And my kiddo at that time would have already been 6. So he was navigating the iPad okay to do it. It's a really old one that didn't have much else on it, but I thought that was a great program, and I think it can be a great option for a kindergartner or a first grade kiddo who just needs a little bit more work, or you want them practicing, but you don't want them doing a lot of writing because it's online. So you're tapping and touching things without worrying about pencil grips or workbooks. That said, if you do try Hooked on Phonics with a younger kiddo, I would tread with a lot of caution when it comes to the workbook that they do send. They don't call it a workbook, but it's meant for you to write in it. So you know our stance on writing when hands are not developmentally ready for it. So just be careful about that. So, all right. What if you're with a program that requires you show work samples for phonics in kindergarten? Depending on where you are, what state you're in, what kind of funds you might be getting, you might be like, okay, I know Megan and Amanda said I should avoid workbooks and worksheets at this point, if at all possible, but we really need the funding that comes with this program, and they are requiring a monthly written work sample. In that case, you might be able to use an Explode the Code workbook. I'm going to be honest, I don't think they're very fun. My kiddo didn't enjoy them all that much, but almost every school district, charter school, whatever, they have approved Explode the Code. It works. It's going to get the job done.
Mhm.
It works for a work sample. I personally really like the Carson DeLosa Gold Star Phonics series. They are these really affordable, usually less than $5 for a workbook, colorful glitter workbooks. And the kindergarten one, especially, has lots of activities that are like drawing lines to match things and identifying the phonics things that match and circling images, all things that you can do with a chunky crayon or a fat marker. So it's pretty easy to get a lot out of it without having to focus on pencil grips and tracing letters and that kind of stuff. So it's a good middle ground. You're not completely avoiding the worksheets, but if you need some kind of a written work, it shows that they're learning the phonics ideas without them doing a lot of letter tracing and stuff before their hands are ready for that. Okay, so for actual curriculum that is science of reading focused, again, ideally more like first grade, because before that, it can feel a bit, sometimes a lot, tedious for littles. And that is not what we want them thinking about learning. And we really don't want them thinking that reading is tedious and boring. So don't jump the gun on this just because, like, oh, they're going to be behind. Please, that's damage that you don't want to have to try to undo. That said, for first grade, I do really like All About Reading. So definitely do their placement test. It's on their website. Make sure that you get the best level for your kiddo. If you have been doing other play-based organic phonics learning, you're probably not going to need the first couple of levels. So double check the placement before you pick anything up. And there's also Logic of English. It is also Science of Reading aligned. Now I'm going to say it is pretty full on. So just make sure you and your kiddo are both up for it. And also remember, it is totally normal for kids at this age to have an attention span equal to however old they are. So if your kiddo is almost 7, you can expect them to focus on a beautiful multimodal reading lesson for almost 7 minutes. So when you're planning this out and you're like, we're going to spend 20 minutes on our reading curriculum, it is not going to work. You're going to be frustrated. They're going to hate it. You're going to think, well, this doesn't work. We need to do something different. Stretch it out as long as you need to. A lesson can take an entire week to get through. Don't spend more time than they can do if you're going to use a curriculum, especially.
Yeah, because that's not factoring in neurodivergence, ADHD, and that's an average. And we know that on average, sometimes boys, it's even less. And for girls, it can be a little bit higher sometimes at that age. So, because we see a lot of posts where people are frustrated that their 5 and 6-year-old, even younger than that, 4 years old, 3 years old, that they won't sit for this carefully planned 30-minute lesson. And it's not age appropriate. It's not. But yeah. All right. Back to phonics. Okay. So phonics, I think we're all on the same page. A really important foundational skill for teaching your kiddo to be a proficient reader. And being a proficient reader is really important, not only if you'd like to know how World War II started, because Germany did not invite Poland over, but it also helps build your kiddo's confidence and it unlocks a genuine love of reading, which I think is a huge goal for so many people who are homeschooling, because unlocking a love of reading unlocks the world. It's just huge. So it's so, so, so important because reading is ultimately about access for your kids to read stories and to better understand history, to explore scientific topics that interest them, to understand democracy and government, just expand their knowledge base to all sorts of random things that interest them, for them to build empathy. Stories are so huge at building empathy. I mean, hello, I'm teaching an entire book club this summer called the Ugly Cry Edition. And we cry every week. I mean, every week somebody's crying in book club because these stories are just, you're so invested in these stories and these characters.
But so much of that requires that final piece of comprehension, the
Mhm.
ability to take a step back and understand more than just the words on the page, but all of the stuff that's wrapped up in the words on the page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So for your kids to really have this joy and this love of reading, but then also to take up the mantle of their civic responsibility and understand critical thinking and justice and government and current events and all of this stuff requires that they can read and understand things, which is super duper important. And it explains a lot about our current situation in the world. But yeah,
There is that.
so with that, friends, it's time for us to wrap up with our mantra for the day, which is every sound mastered through phonics becomes another step toward confident reading. Every book they can read becomes another way to explore the world, which is so huge. And they need that.
Yeah.
And we need to give that to them. Amazing.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's it. Of all the things that we're going to teach our kids as homeschoolers, I feel like reading is probably the most important because they can access all of the other things if they've got reading.
Mhm.
And it doesn't just have to be hardback reading. If you're listening to this and going like, well, I have a dyslexic kid and this doesn't apply to, we've talked about that tons. We have episodes on that. We have episodes on audiobooks and how audiobooks are also reading. You can use all of these other resources to still make sure that you're building all of these steps that are in the science of reading and that you're making sure you're focusing on the vocabulary and the fluency and the comprehension. It all wraps up together. Phonics is still an important part of that, even if your kiddo has some other struggles in there. That's okay.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. No judgment from us. And there's no deadline or finish line. This can be something that you can be working on. We talk about all the time incremental growth. That's the key. So, progress, growth. You're doing amazing. All
Yep.
right. So, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've got questions that you can't find in the show notes, you can find us on social media. We're mostly on Facebook and Instagram. Send us a DM. Come to one of our Patreon lives. We have a Q&A every month. We have a homeschooling neurodivergent kids every month. Come. That's what we're there for. We love to connect. We love to help. So yeah, until the next time, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.